Hello, welcome back to Vizru's walkthrough series. My name is Ben, and I'm here with our guest Justin, who is a product manager here at Vizru. And he'll be taking us through the Livecloud services that Vizru offers on the platform. So, hello, Justin, once again, and go ahead and take it away.
Yeah, so let's talk about Vizru's API gateway. First, let's understand what an API is at a basic level, right? So API stands for Application Programming Interface. So it's basically a medium that allows communication between two systems, right? I'll give you a quick metaphor on how this works. So suppose that you're a customer at a restaurant and you're looking through the menu and you decided what you want to eat, right? And so the waiter comes by, he takes your order. So you can think of yourself and the waiter as the two systems that'll talk to each other, right? So you give your order and you want the steak and mashed potatoes. Great, the waiter jots that down and then goes to the kitchen and they start to cook your order. So your order can be thought as the input parameters, right? So our input parameter is what we would like to eat. And then the output, of course, would be our cooked meal. So really, the API has the ability to specify what we want from a target system. And then the target system comes back with some kind of response, right? So instead of food, the API actually returns data. So using Vizru's API gateway, we can actually create reusable microservices for the workflow to interact with. And Vizru can connect with any service out there that has an API or even integrate with the legacy system, right? So in today's example, we'll connect to an API that takes latitude and longitude as an input, and then the output will be the respective geographical information. So just note, this is a very simple API example to get you started. Some APIs can be quite complex, and we'll save those for later videos. So let's get started setting up our API function. To get to the Livecloud section, we'll go down here in the bottom left, settings, and click cloud services. Okay, so you can think of all of these blocks here as your folders, right, to organize your functions. So I've created one called geocode. If we click in that, we have a function called getLocation. Okay, if you were to create a new function, all we have to do is come down here on the bottom right and click create general function, okay? And then you would specify all your parameters here. For sake of convenience, I already set one up here so that we can talk through this one. So the interface that you see here is designed to be very easy to use. And if you've ever used the Postman application, you'll notice some similarities between the two. So some of the parameters we can define are the function name, the API type, REST, SOAP, Vizru basic API allows us to actually pass parameters into an internal script, which then executes a set of instructions. And then the method, you have your basic post, get, delete, update, put, and then of course your base URL. And then down below, you can specify your key value pairs. So each key value pair can actually have different variable types. We have many variable types. Choosing fixed, for example, means that this certain key value pair is not cannot be changed in our workflow. However, if it's set to variable, then we'll see later we can dynamically change the values for these fields in the workflow. If you were setting up a variable to be in the header, then we would choose HTTP header. We can also do things like pass JSON, right? Pass URL parameters. You could specify all that here as well. And for authentication, we support basic authentication, SSL certificates, OAuth, and OAuth 2.
So that method that you filled in up above, sorry to go back to that, but that's basically just what type of API call? Because I know there's get, update. So it seems kind of like the, I guess for lack of better terms, method that you are using this function.
Exactly, yeah. So you use the get block, or you use not the get block, the get method, if you want the receiving system to just view the data, right, without making any changes. While post you would typically use a post when you want to change a value. So let's say that you had an API that actually changed password or something. Since we're actually changing something, then we'd use the post.
Okay, that makes sense.
Okay, so let's talk about some of these parameters. So the function name, of course, is the name of the function. Once the API is set up, you can find this function in the workflow by searching for its name. So make sure to give the function a proper name so that's easy to find in the workflow later on. Typically, whoever's providing the API will have some kind of documentation on how to successfully authenticate and how to pass parameters in. But with this API here, no authentication is required. And all we have to do is specify the type, the method, base URL, and then these three parameters here, the latitude, longitude, and then the language. So I have the variables here already defined. So if I click validate, we'll execute the function and we're able to view the results. So it looks like this latitude and longitude is in India. Looks like it's in the city of Kerala. Okay. So once we know our function works, we can save this by clicking update function. Okay. So now inside the workflow, we'll actually have a block called get location for us to use as a reusable microservice. So suppose you had an application that takes in these coordinates and you have to transform them into an actual location, right? So let's create a workflow to help us do just that. So we'll create a new workflow, call it demo, get location. All right. And we know we need to start with the get parameters. And then we'll go ahead and search. Let's see, location. Boom, there it is. So geocode.getLocation. Go ahead and drag that in. And we'll hit save. Okay, so now let's rename get parameters as entry. And here in the API block, we'll go ahead and specify our latitude and longitude. Okay, so let's make this, let's make these values dynamic by assigning variables passed through the entry block. So in our entry block, we'll have two parameters, latitude and longitude. And so we'll say entry.lat for latitude and entry.long for the longitude. Okay, we'll hit save and close.
So just as clarification, this orange with the cloud, this block is what we just built, right? The get location API block. We just created that, right?
Exactly. That's
awesome.
What we just created. And if you notice, latitude and longitude here have the type variable, while this language has the value fixed. Okay. So if we go back in our block, latitude and longitude are variable, right? They can change, while the language is cannot be changed, right? Because it's fixed.
It's going to stay in English, yeah. Okay.
Yeah. All right, so let's test this out. So if we hit test, we'll give the entry block two parameters, lat and long. And I have a set of coordinates here. Go ahead and copy and paste them in. All right, let's enable our log and re-execute it. Great, okay. All right, so now if we look inside this block, we see that the execution was successful. And we can see that these coordinates are for somewhere in the United States, looks like Washington, D.C.
Awesome.
Right, so we can take this information, we can store it in our spreadsheet, transform it in any way we want, etc.
And I should have asked this question before, but when we're creating our API gateway block, are we referencing a database or any database, or how does that work? That URL, is that referencing kind of a database, or where are we getting these results, I guess you could say?
Right. That's a great question. So typically, all of this information, the base URL, the API type and method, as well as the key value pairs in the body, will be defined by whoever made the API. So let's say that you want an API to get, let's see, I have an example here. Okay, so if we take a look at this example, this is a news API that fetches news articles across the internet. So typically with any kind of API, there will be documentation where they specify, okay, this is the URL that you use, these are the parameters, this is what's possible, etc.
Okay.
Yeah, so all I'm doing is I'm taking the information from the documentation and posting it here.
Okay, makes sense.
All right, so now we've seen an example of using Vizru's workflow to call a microservice internally. But what if we wanted to use the workflow itself as an API endpoint so that a system outside of Vizru can actually make a call into this workflow? So I'll show you how to do that in the most simplest way without authentication. In a later video, we can discuss how we can set up authentication mechanisms so that we can verify whoever's making the request into the workflow. So whenever you want to use a workflow as an API endpoint, you must first start with either a get or a post block. So we'll get rid of our get parameters and we'll bring in our generic get block. Okay, so this will be our starting point. And we'll call this entry, and then we'll provide our email right here. Okay, and then just to reiterate, we use the get block if we want the receiving system to just view the data without making any changes, while post typically is used when you want to change values. So we'll use this workflow as an example where we'll call this workflow from Postman, okay? So let's switch over to Postman. Okay, so in Postman, I created a function called getLocation. So now what we need to do is fill in the request URL and then define the parameters. So we'll go ahead and copy the workflow URL and paste it here. Now there's a few things you want to do here. First, we want to get rid of this number sign and then change debugger to trigger. So it's workflow.trigger. Okay, so this lets the workflow know that you want to execute it. And then we had a couple parameters, right? Lat and long. So let me go ahead and get a different set of coordinates. Okay, and we'll hit send. Let's see my results. All right, right here. So the output from the workflow will be the very last block. So in our case, the last block was the content returned from the API, right? So you can imagine the endless possibilities to be had if the endless possibilities to be had using Vizru's workflows and API, from returning content in a spreadsheet to transforming data, running through complex logic, etc. So these new coordinates I just provided looks like South America, and this is Sao Paulo, Brazil. Okay, so just to recap, I showed you how easy it is to set up an API function using Vizru's API Gateway. how to actually use that function inside a workflow, and then I showed you an example of how you can use Vizru's workflow as an API endpoint for another system to interact with.
Yep, and that's everything from Justin today. Thank you, Justin, for taking us through today's Vizru Livecloud services and how to use those through the workflow as well. Take care, and we'll see you next time.